if you go through the terms and conditions of both the convertible bonds and call them the normal bonds,
Right.
clearly they've defaulted. They have breached the covenants, and the moment you breach your covenant, you're effectively into default. Now, what that means is that the bondholders can call up all the money. So we're talking the major part of the 8 billion euros that they owe in Europe. It comprises various types of bonds. Now, I don't believe the banks are going to turn around and say, give me my 8 billion tomorrow, because Steinhoff hasn't got the 8 billion, and the banks will lose the major part of that money. So what do I think will happen? Well, the banks are calling the tune, they're calling the shots, and what the banks are going to do, when you're going to default, the interest rate changes. Gone are the days when the most recent bond they took out, they were paying, I think, 1.5% per annum. Those days are over. When you're in default status, the cost of the bond can go anywhere 10%.
Right.
And when you've got 8 billion and it's going to cost you 10%, that's 800 million euros of your operating profit gone to service the interest bill. Now we've got to say to ourselves, and this is really the tricky one, and this is my one, I put Steinhoff, the various components into 3 pots.
Right.
The one pot is, what do I think is real, is genuine? I think the operating businesses, the Conforama's, the ERMs,
Mattress Firm, Pepkor.
Well, no, excluding Mattress Firm, the European operating companies, that's Conforama, the ERM, the UK businesses, the furniture businesses, they're pretty sound. The operating margins appear to be fairly realistic. The income that they're declaring from internal and external supply chain, to me, they look a little bit on the high side. I don't know to what extent they could have been manipulated. The income from the properties may be a little bit on the high side, but there are properties which are rented out to third parties and internally, and therefore there is a level of income from the properties. May not be what they're saying it is, but it is something. But when I add all that up, trust me, I don't get more than 800 million euros or 1,000 million euros, depending on what interest rate the banks are going to demand, which means that the European furniture businesses' operating profits, which I think are realistic, minus the cost of the interest, will leave you with nothing. So that's my first pot. The second pot are the figures which I think are questionable. I've discussed the internal, external supply chain. But what I think is obviously the interest income that they receive on these loans they've been making, that clearly appears to be a manipulated number. So the income there is probably zero. The American operation, you mentioned Mattress Firm. I don't think it's making money at all, and it's probably losing money. And they said in the announcement in December, the presentation, they need another $200 million to fix it up. So that clearly goes in that pot. It's making no money at all, and it's probably not going to make money.
I mean, Sid, you're essentially saying that they're going to need more money to service their debt. Where are they going to get this money from, though?
Okay. Where are they going to get the money? The banks who are calling the shots are going to... This is my personal opinion.
Sure.
Obviously, you haven't spoken to anybody. It's what I've conjured up in preparation for today's discussion. No, I've had to put some thought into it. Number one, I think the banks are going to demand that they sell the American business.
That's Mattress Firm.
Yes. My gut feel is that the management there will try to do an MBO, backed by some venture capitalists.
MBO.
A management buyout.
Right.
Backed by the venture capitalists who put up money. Clearly, Steinhoff aren't going to get back what they paid for it. But I think the banks will be happy to take something more realistic, but not what they paid for it.
Right.
But I think that's gone. I think the banks are already insisting that they sell some properties. I see a major retail site in Vienna, one of the Liner stores. They own the building. I read on the internet over the weekend, the building is apparently being sold. The banks are
as is the Jet, I understand.
As is the Jet.
Yes.
And that's clearly the banks putting pressure on them. Sell things that don't produce income. There's a lot more property I think the banks are going to insist that they sell.
What about the UK business? Poundland came out with some results over the festive season. They look pretty good.
Interesting. Now, Poundland's an interesting thing. We've got to take Poundland and put it together with Pepkor, and let's call it Pepkor Europe, because that's where Poundland is. It's Poundland, Pep & Co. in Poland, and Pep & Co.'s got a lot of other operations in many, many other Eastern European countries. that as a business unit is growing exponentially, but it's also pretty profitable. I wouldn't be surprised, this is my feeling, that Star, in other words, Steinhoff Retail Africa, which is a well-funded and highly profitable business, I wouldn't be surprised that with the assistance from the banks, that they buy it from Steinhoff. And the banks will provide the funding for them to buy it, because the banks would be happy to have Steinhoff Retail Africa, Star, owe their money rather than Steinhoff.
Even though the man that recently headed Steinhoff Retail Africa, Star, Ben Lagrange, has now stepped down, and many people are saying that he's also tainted throughout this entire saga.
He clearly may well be tainted, because he was the CFO for many years.
And who's to say it's him alone?
No, well, but I think he's out of the picture. He was only the CEO of Star for 2 months. And he was put there at the time of the listing. He never actually ran any of its business units. Never, ever. The business units are run by their highly competent management, particularly the Pepkor people, both in SA and in Europe. And Andy Bond, who runs the UK, well, the Pepkor operation Europe, he comes with a pedigree second to none. He's an ex-Walmart man.
Okay, so a good guy running Star.
Put together an Andy Bond running European operations, Star in South Africa run by the old Pepkor group. Essentially, you're taking the old Pepkor and putting it together again as a listed entity, but with completely new shareholders.
Right.
Because Visa, who was once the major shareholder in Pepkor, and in fact that's what create a lot of his wealth, unfortunately all that's been swapped for Steinhoff shares, which clearly you're going to ask me the next question, I guess, is what do I think Steinhoff's worth? Do you want me to give you a view?
A quick one, because we are out of time.
No, I'll give you a view. If I put everything together with all the negatives and all the positives and the interest factor I've just spoken about, maybe it's worth 8 rand a share.
Wow. It is currently trading at 8 rand a share, so that's quite...
My gut feel tells me it's worth between 8 and 10. I have difficulty believing it's worth more than 10. There are many, many other imponderables we haven't even discussed here.
We haven't, and we're going to catch up at another stage. So let's just leave it there for now. Unfortunately, we are out of time. But